Okay, so thank you, Angela, for that kind introduction. So tonight, yeah, trail running with a Scottish flavour, 40 to 80k. Although, uh, just to be clear, what we'll be doing this evening can be applicable to all events, um, shorter or longer. Um, the what can you actually, Angela? Can I just check? Are you seeing? Um, all of the screen there. I've got this kind of weird. Right. No, I think,
Yeah,
yeah, okay. I think
yeah.
that's it now. Right.
And there's a wee red
Yeah.
dot.
Yeah. So I've got the red dot. That's mine. So that's planned. So that's okay. Thank you. So Cairn Franc was the World Mountain and Trail Championships that occurred last September in Spain, and I was fortunate enough to have two of my athletes selected for GB. Naomi got a fantastic bronze in the women's 44k, and Alistair Graves made his debut international with a good strong performance to finish in the top half of the men's field. Um, so I'm a coach, as Angela says, from 800 meters to ultra marathon. I don't regard myself as a specialist coach in trail running. I'm more a coach who likes to coach individual athletes no matter what their event is and really kind of work out what they need to do in order to get better at that particular event. So a bit more of that later. Um, I'm also really keen on the psychological aspects of performance. And I've actually, just a quick plug, I've written a book called Peak Performance Psychology for Endurance Athletes that will be coming out via the publisher Routledge at the end of March. And I'll say a bit more of that at the end. So essentially, what makes trail running unique? So, it's very, very different from road running. I mean, you can see from these three guys here who were in the Canfranc Long Trail race that the terrain is really very technical. There are large kind of elevations, gains and losses, and trail running can be anything from a kind of small amount of 1,000 meter climb and fall up to 5,000 meters or more, and particularly in the longer events, even more than that. So huge elevations and you have to cope with that. And that therefore gives a lot of variable kind of pacing demands. So you may be running really hard uphill, but be running 8, 10, or even 12-minute miles. But believe you me, it feels bloody hard. And then, on the other side, as you're coming downhill, you may be running 5-minute miles. So there's a huge, variable pacing demand there that we need to take into account. And in many respects, we need really high durability, and durability is really about, how you can make repeated, high outputs throughout the race, but particularly in the last third of a race, which is when things can kind of really bite. So durability is kind of high on the list of developing. There's also the vagaries of weather when you're out there. You've got kit. You can see these guys all carrying kit. I think this guy's got his hand in his pocket, to pull something out. Um, so there's kit, there's risk management, and as I've alluded to earlier, there's a significant psychological load. I mean, all races bring on a bit of uncertainty to them, no matter how good you feel or how good your form is going into this. So you have to deal with uncertainty, stuff that happens during the race. And in particular, in these longer races, you will undoubtedly enter a pain cave, roughly about two-thirds of the way in. So the last third of the race, you have to have mechanisms for dealing mentally and physically with that particular kind of load. So interestingly, when we're looking at core behaviors of exceptional coaches, so Oyvind Sandbach, who's an international researcher in all matters endurance, he's a world-class researcher. He and his team looked at 77 endurance coaches across all sports. So they had running, cross-country skiing, cycling, all coaches who had taken athletes to top level. And they came out really with five core behaviors. And the first is really these coaches knew their athletes deeply. And that's kind of like the highest level, number one thing that we can do, particularly if you're a coach. You have to know your athlete, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what are their vulnerabilities, what are their skill sets. Um, we need to build stable long-term training systems with these athletes. Sure, you can get some short-term success with kind of very intense short training escapades, but in the main, in order to do really well, we need to build stable long-term systems. And these coaches also use very simple sessions. Their adage was they believed in simple sessions done really well. And close to my heart was that they also suggested that you needed to integrate your psychological skills into training. There's a number of things around that in terms of training that many people think that you do the physical training and you do a bit of mental training separately, but it's really important, particularly in trail running, in my view, that you devise sessions, training sessions that also involve uh, people having to go into the pain cave and also use their particular mental strategies within that session to get through. And of course, all good coaching relationships are about building trust, about effective collaboration and communications. Now, some people on the call tonight are probably without coaches. And if you are without a coach, the key thing for you is to know yourself deeply, is to have a good look at yourself about your strengths and weaknesses. And we'll come on about how we can do a bit more of that in the next few slides. So I've got kind of 7 key coaching principles, and I use this for all athletes. And my key is really that it's about the individual first, and the program is very much second. I do want to know, who is this athlete? What are their strengths? What are their vulnerabilities? What are their skill sets? And what's the gap between where they are now and where we're looking to go? So that's by far and away number one. As I've kind of alluded to, durability governs progression. Whether you're an 800-meter runner or an ultra marathon runner or a mountain runner, the last third of your race is the bit that we really need to make sure that you're trained effectively for, so that you can finish in good shape and get a top class performance. So durability is one of the keys. We do keep some intensity all year round. That's not to say that I would train intensely all year round. There's got to be peaks and troughs in terms of how we prepare for races. But I would never get too far away from some of the type of intensity that's used in races, although the volume of that will be quite small. Um, Technical skill. We absolutely need technical skills for running up and downhill. And while some people would appear to be naturals at it, and Naomi is one who's said to be a natural world-class downhiller, technical skill is absolutely trainable, and no matter how bad or how good you are, you can always get better. Again, back to the psychology, your psychological state shapes pacing and performance. So really important to take psychology into the equation. We do need to train downhill, but it's a weapon that's needs to be used sparingly. You can really trash your legs by doing too much downhill work. And there's some really good research that suggests that you don't have to do downhills too frequently in order to reap the benefits. And bottom line is fueling. Fueling is non-negotiable, and that's fueling not only for the race itself, which we'll come on to, but fueling for your training. You need to make sure you're adequately fueled for the type of sessions that you're doing. So I have an athlete profiling model that I use. It's usually in the back of my mind, but I've kind of brought it to the forefront and put it on a slide. These are things that I kind of pay attention to for all athletes that I'm coaching. And if we look at the left-hand side of the screen here, this is maximal sprint speed and strides. And you may be thinking, what on earth has maximal sprint speed got to do with running 40 or 80K on a trail? But the bottom line is that if you can keep in touch with your basic speed, it's really good for improving running economy. So, we never get too far away from having something that is a bit faster in training. Then if we move on to the next rectangle, that's our maximal aerobic speed, which is essentially 3 to 5K type of training. And again, that's a really important thing to develop, particularly early on in a training program before getting a bit, before getting on to the longer sessions. Um, for me, critical speed or threshold training is one of the pivotal aspects of any endurance athlete's training. It should be in every athlete's program, preferably from my point of view, all year round. And critical speed is very good for providing endurance for the shorter trail events and races like 10K or shorter. But it's also a stepping stone once you've developed your critical speed to extend that into what I call marathon pace sessions, which we adapt for trail running and extend that even further into the general endurance and durability that's required to really excel in longer distances. This bit here, the anaerobic speed reserve. So traditionally, that's kind of like 800 and 1500-meter runner training that go into, metabolic acidosis. And you may think, well, what's that got to do with trail running? Well, when you're running really hard uphill and you're at your threshold and above, and you're going into the severe domain of activity, you're going to accrue some lactic acid in your muscles, and you need to deal with that. So training an anaerobic speed reserve is really quite important. And as I've said, we need to check the box on marathon pace training. How good are you at that? What do you need to develop? And again, in terms of your general endurance ability. So these are the main boxes. And really, I would say to both coaches and athletes is to rate yourself on a 1 to 10 basis on where are you in each of these boxes? What are you really good at? And what do you need to develop? And particularly when you're looking at your next race or next key race, which is maybe 2 or 3 months away, what's the gap that you need to close and in which area? So that's kind of like some of the physical aspects of my profiling model, but I also have other aspects which are I like to look at who is this athlete psychologically? What's their personality? What's their psychological strengths? What technical skills do they have? What do we need to develop? I'm interested in their medical and injury history because that can often put some confines onto what we do in training and how we train, how frequently, and what sort of activities we use. What's their current durability and fatigue resistance? And is that something that we really need to pay attention to and develop? And all athletes recover differently. Some athletes can do some really hard, say, for example, marathon pace sessions. 2 or 3 days later, they're ready to rock and roll and get on with it, whereas others may require 5 or 6 days. Everybody's got a different recovery profile, so it's important to know for your athlete what is that profile. Nutrition and GI tolerance, so you have to feed your training. So need good nutrition. And in terms of racing, we need to really adapt our gut tolerance to taking on high levels of carbohydrate loading. So I'm really looking to assess that. I'm looking at what's this athlete's strength, power, and stability. And you might think, what's strength and power got to do with it? But when you look at the difference between road runners and trail runners, one of the key things is trail runners have got better leg strength, and that's something that's developed on the trails, but can also be developed through strength work, which I think is also really quite important as well. I'm also looking at the athlete and their environment, what's available to them in terms of their training environment. How close are the hills? How close are the various parameters that we need to be using in training? And of course, lifestyle constraints. So, some athletes may well be full-time students on a course which allows them to train through the day. Some others may have a full-time job, a family, two kids, and have significant lifestyle constraints around that. So we need to take all that into consideration when creating an athlete profile. Why does profiling matter? Well, it matters because you can have two athletes, they're doing the same race, but they may have completely different needs. And they may well do very similar performances, but come at it from different tangents. So we need to think about how do we build a program around an athlete's strengths and their vulnerabilities. So this is a busy slide, and this is the training menu or toolkit that I kind of work from. Now, this is not to say that I use all of these sessions with every athlete, but I'll use a lot of them. So let's just work through them one by one. Uh, so maximal sprint speed, as I've said before, I think keeping some hill sprints in can be really useful at certain times of the year. But you can get away with doing 6 or 10, 20-second fast strides during an easy recovery run, just to keep in touch with that speed and keep in touch with that cadence. It really helps your posture and your running economy. One of the keys early doors for me is about developing maximal aerobic speed, 3 to 5K pace. Classically that might be 15 to 2400s done either in a 1 hour or as in sets with a 45 to 60 second recovery. That can be done on the road. It can be done on off-road, on a trail, an undulating trail. I usually try and make sure that it's not done in anything too kind of steep because we really want to be developing a good flow cadence and developing that speed. And another classical session, that most coaches will know is 6 to 7 times 3 minutes or 1K with a 2-minute recovery. I spoke about anaerobic speed reserve being the kind of gap between kind of your sprint speed and your maximal aerobic speed. And I don't develop that directly with just one session. I tend to use a hill sandwich, in the early part of training for this. So that would involve something like a 15-minute threshold or tempo run, then 12 by 60 second hills with a jog back recovery, and then finish with, say, 5 by 3 minutes roundabout threshold with a 45-second float. And you can mix and match these kind of sessions, and they can develop a number of qualities within that one session. As I've said, critical speed and threshold is one of the keys. There's a lot talked about that, the Norwegian method, etc. Double thresholds. I think that cruise intervals are a staple for me, and sessions like 5 to 6 times 5 to 8 minute reps. 1 to 2 minutes float. So I usually do like a float that's about either 40 seconds per kilometer or 60 seconds per mile slower than the actual repetition, rather than a complete rest or just a jog. And once athletes have got to that 30 to 40 minute mark and they're able to do that comfortably, I might think about adding in a double threshold day, and that's usually a shorter session, 90 seconds to 3 minutes, to a total of about 24 to 30 minutes of running. Typical uphill work, moving on from a hill sandwich, might be 4 to 6 times 3 to 5 minute hard uphill with a jog back recovery. And downhill training, I do limit downhill training. I think that it needs to be used appropriately and effectively. The research suggests that it should be limited to every 2 to 3 weeks. You can get really good bang for your buck by doing a hard session every 3 weeks or so, and that reduces the impact of potential injury. And in that kind of specific preparation phase, I normally like to use that within races. So we may have a goal in a race that you're really going to run the downhills as hard as possible. And again, there's one or two specific preparatory period sessions that I would use, but I certainly wouldn't overload this. One of my favorites is actually using marathon specific sessions. I don't know how many of you were at last week's webinar on marathon training, which was really very good and is now available online. I'd suggest looking at that too. So I kind of translate these sessions into off-road sessions. So typical early days marathon session would be 8 to 10 by 1K, hard with a 1K float. And we convert that to 4 minutes hard and 4 minutes easier, so times 10. And that might progress to 4 to 5 times 5K with a 1K float. And again, converting that to 20 minutes on, 4 minutes off. In the more specific part of preparation, we'll be looking particularly in this case for Can Frank was we needed to get in some 40 to 60K runs that kind of match the terrain, the effort, and the intensity. But we don't need very many of those. And of course, all the time we need to be thinking that durability engine, getting our time on feet and just building our aerobic engine continuously. There are other things though that I kind of look at, and I think this is where trail running is a bit more unique than road running or track running. And we've used a lot of cycling, which in the specific schedules that I'll be showing you, we'll see a bit of that. So 2 to 6 hours of volume gives really good aerobic conditioning. It's reduced impact. It means you can run hard and do a really hard session in one day, but you can still get a really good aerobic workout the next, whilst you're recovering. Swimming's also a good recovery modality, and for someone like Naomi is a very good swimmer, so she actually gets an aerobic conditioning out of that too. Strength and conditioning is often developed through trail-specific resilience. So if you're running trails, you will develop a lot more strength in your legs with the repeated up and downs. But I think it's also important to look at getting gym strength, work, and also looking at a bit of plyometrics to keep that strength conditioning up. Nutrition we've spoken about, so fueling is key. Fueling your training. There's it's not actually anecdotal. There's actually some really good research on female longer distance ultra runners who in particular get RED-S, that relative energy deficiency syndrome, and so I think fueling is a really important thing for coaches of endurance athletes to really be majoring on, male and female. And of course, we need to do a bit of GI training to, train the gut for racing. And again, performance psychology. How do people deal with threat? How do we turn threat into challenge? What mental cues are we using? What's our self-talk? What are we saying to ourselves when things are not going so well? How do we turn that around? Have we got visualization skills that we can use? What's our state management like? And also that also translates into pacing and RPE, rate of perceived exertion. So that's really about how does it feel when you're running at a particular pace, and particularly when you're redlining on that edge and your RPE is 17 or 18 out of 20. So phasing your year. Clearly, if you've got a kind of longer term big goal like a world championships, you do have to work towards that. And I usually like to phase things by doing a bit of general work, prior to that. So not could be 6 to 8 weeks, but we're really looking at the extremes of paces. We're going from making sure there's a bit of fast stuff with fast strides or short hills, as well as the longer stuff. So this is a time to build your maximal aerobic speed foundation, really getting that 3 to 5K work going before extending it out into 10K and beyond, getting that critical speed and threshold base, and again, allowing for extension. We can develop aerobic durability just by getting out on the hills for time, just enjoyable long runs. Will start to develop that durability. I've spoken about strength emphasis, which can be done in the gym, and we do early anaerobic speed reserve generally through hill sandwiches, and they're a kind of training item that I really like, and I think most runners, once they do them, actually enjoy them too. And I use them not only for my hill runners, I use them for folk doing 10K to marathon as well. We then get on to a specific preparatory period. Again, that might be 6 to 8 weeks. And within that, there will be specific prep races. And they're not our A-level races. There may be a B or a C race, but they're there to um, engender a particular quality that we want to develop. Our threshold extends then into more marathon pace marathon pace type sessions, but over undulating terrain. We'll include some long climbs. We'll do a bit of downhill prep. We'll do these 40 to 60K simulations, nutrition practice, and ensure particularly that the technical terrain that we're working on mimics what we're going to encounter during that main race. I'm not a huge fan on tapering. Other than that, I think we should ease up a bit in the final 2 weeks. I think it's important to maintain that maximal aerobic speed and critical speed threshold. Reduce volume. I mean, often folks say 30 to 50%. I think 30% is probably as far as I would normally go. I think it's important to keep technique fresh. You can keep in some strides and short hills, but one of the keys is around how do we restore your energy, your readiness, uh, psychological consolidation. What's your race plan? How are you going to use your psychology within the race? That needs to be planned out, and you need to kind of run through that mentally. And of course, we need to minimize injury risk during a taper. So we're going to do a case study. This is Naomi Lang. So I've coached Naomi for a number of years now. Naomi was a good 1,500 to 5K runner. She's a 16-minute 5K. So she's got strong maximal aerobic speed to start with, and we've developed our critical speed and threshold capabilities. I knew 2 to 3 years ago she had pretty good durability on minimal training, and that she was also a world-class downhiller. But the problem was a couple of years ago that she was a world-class downhiller, but wasn't necessarily with the leaders at the top of the hill to employ those skills. So, picked up a lot of places on the downhill, but I knew would do even better if we could get that kind of uphill fitness improved, and also really building a bit more of that marathon specific, long grinding kind of training, and making sure that we built in some precision around nutrition. So we're going to look at a race specific training phase leading up to the World Championships. So a month after winning the trial race, Naomi ran the Marathon du Mont Blanc, which is one of the most prestigious races on the circuit, and podium placed in third, and basically that proved to me what I'd known for a long time, that Naomi was a world-class racer. But I think her bemused face on crossing the line it hadn't quite sunk in with her how good she actually was. And I'm not sure she believes it at the moment as well. She then spent a week at 3,000 meters altitude, but there was no real training involved in that. It was part of a course, but she will have developed a number of additional red blood cells at that altitude. And when she came back down from altitude, we had about 8 weeks to prepare for the Worlds. So we used two key sessions a week. The first session was pretty much always a staple. It was some kind of double threshold most weeks, and for a total of about 45 to 55 minutes. We had some key sessions and races at the weekends. So we did a typical wave run. So 4, 8, 12, 12, 8, 4 minutes with 4 minutes between each repetition. Was a pretty classical wave session on the trails. That was followed by the Pete Sal Golden Trail race. Due to severe weather, that was constrained to 20K and just a 1,000 meter climb. But Naomi won that as well, which again showed that she was really in good shape. We went to Zierzanal, I think it was the week after, or certainly shortly thereafter. As I say, in good shape. Weather conditions were really very hot. It was about 35 degrees. It was a superb field. Naomi started off very conservatively as we planned and worked her way through to a overall 10th place. It was actually 11th, but the girl that was first had an adverse drug event in recent times. So which is a sad thing to see in our sport, but it is everywhere. But that race was a really good test, just over 3 hours, and it was probably the time that she ran would have podium placed in previous years. So a really good 3,000 meter elevation, and so a good training as well as racing opportunity. Back down to a Salomon event. So Naomi is sponsored by Salomon, and I had an obligation to run this 15K race, a midweek race, which was a nice little kind of faster effort. And then that was followed by a marathon wave session where we did around 30, 25, 20, 15, 10 in 5 minutes with a 5-minute float. So that's around 2.5 hours of really quite significant work, hard work on the trails. And then we did really one very long specific run. We matched 3,500 meters elevation, which was really what was going to happen in the World Championships race. And Naomi ran a 5 hours 58 for that training session. So really hard session, and equated with a kind of time that we thought she was going to be on her feet for around 5 hours in the World Championships race. And then we had a real killer of a final session, which is 5 by 1 mile down, very fast, and immediately 1 mile up again. And with about a 4-minute recovery at the top. That is one that is really very hard to go down and immediately up, a real tester. And we did that one 3 weeks out, and Naomi is on the call, and you might want to ask her how her legs felt after that. And then we're really into taper. As I said earlier, I'm not a fan of huge tapers, and Naomi particularly just continued with a double threshold 2 weeks to go, 4 by 6 minutes, and then a 15, 10, and 5 minute in later on in the day. And a session I quite like for many endurance runners, whether it's marathon or trail, is to do something like 2 by 30 minutes at a nice steady pace, nothing too hard, and then run 15 minutes very hard, have maybe 5 or 10 minutes easy running, and then repeat. And in the week of the race, again, we've sussed out that with Naomi in particular, she doesn't like to do any major sessions, and we just did the one easy session, 5 by 4 minutes threshold, 6-day float, 4 days out, and then on to the World Championships, where during the race itself, Naomi was in the top 10, roughly about eighth at the top of the very first long climb. In the downhill bit, came through to second, and then was fighting second to third with alternating places with a Spanish athlete all the way to the line a few hours later. So a really good performance there. So we'll move on to our second case study. This is Alistair Graves, and Alistair is a very different athlete to Naomi. Yeah, male versus female, yes, but a number of other different characteristics. So Alistair's a guy who's got excellent durability in long races. He's got really strong mental resilience. His basic speed hasn't been that great, and we also felt we needed some very specific marathon type longer hill climbs, and we needed to really learn how to fuel for a race that was going to be so he had a great race, finishing third in the trials, and that actually showcased Alistair's durability, because he came through really very strongly in the latter third of that race to get third place, and was closing on the leaders at the finish. And because Alistair works full time, and we've had a number of injury and other constraints to work around, so things have been a bit different in his preparation. So, for example, we used just one threshold session a week of 30 to 40 minutes, so no double thresholds. And that was either done as a run or often on an elliptical trainer if his legs were particularly beat up, or we were looking to try and just keep preventing any further injury. So we made good use of additional training. I'm going to just skip to the Sunday sessions. We reckon that because Saturday was going to be really quite hard, we needed a top-up endurance, but running would have just tipped us into a very negative state. So we did 2 to 6 hours on a bike most Sundays and getting that top-up endurance. And for me, the bike is probably, 6 hours on a bike is probably worth about 4 or so hours of running in terms of aerobic development. So what did we do in the Saturday sessions? So we did very similar wave session, 4-8-12, 12-8, 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, just like Naomi. He then went the following week to the Glenshee 34K race and won that, and won it in a record time. So we knew that things were working well. He had a further wave session, 12 by 4 on, 4 off the following weekend, and then run the Call half marathon, an island half marathon that is kind of mixed terrain, but good section of it on the road. And then we did one of our kind of major long endurance duration runs. So 50 kilometers on very undulating, highly technical terrain, which a run that lasted 8 hours, so very considerable volume, and managed to get 75 grams per hour of carbs on board, each hour. So that was really good gut training, which he coped with really very well. Following week, he had survived well enough to do a 4 by 25-minute wave with a 5-minute float. And then we had yet another 50K, this time on much more runnable terrain, so he could get his legs moving a bit better. So that was 5 hours, and we managed to get 90 grams per hour of carbs during that period of time. And then we finished with the same undulating wave session that Naomi did. The taper was planned to do 2 by 10 minutes, 3 by 5 minutes threshold 2 weeks out, and then 40-minute steady, 20 hard with 10 minutes easy, and then repeat. Unfortunately, prior to that final week, when Alistair was travelling by train to Karnak, he came down with a viral illness which affected him for several days and undoubtedly affected his performance in the actual race itself. But he had recovered enough at the end by the end of the week to be able to race, and he started very conservatively, which is what we agreed, and again worked himself through in the second half of the race to finish in the top half of the field and the fourth out of six Brits, which was a great performance. So I just wanted to dip briefly into what world-class ultra physiology teaches us, about 40 to 80k trail racing. So this is Kilian Journey, one of the greatest of all time. And he ran the Western States 100-miler last year, and he had a scientific team follow his training and his racing. And they published a paper on it late last year, which was really quite interesting. So the things that came out of that were really quite important for short and long trail, 40 to 80k trail, where you need to pace below your red line for longer. Don't go daft too early. So you're looking at 85 to 90% of your critical speed or threshold speed, and trying to just stay at that and try and minimize the time that you go above that and into the severe intensity, because that has recovery costs during a run. And it's clear that an early restraint in these kind of races gives you some later race options. And the second thing was that durability beats peak fitness. So in these kind of races, your performance is defined by how slowly your pace degrades in the second half. So you do require a lot of long, steady work, fatigue exposure. We're done with kind of chasing VO2 max sessions kind of earlier in the year. And we're looking to get a controlled fade, not a collapse. So that's the rationale of the durability element. You have to fuel to protect performance, not to simply match your energy cost. So high carb intake, 60 to 90 grams per hour, and as many of you on the call will know, some folk are up to about 140 grams per hour as well. Bit of dehydration is acceptable, but gut failure isn't. Roughly 3% of body mass loss is normal over this kind of distance. It's important to drink to thirst. Don't overdrink. Overdrinking actually creates more problems with bloating and some other issues. In some races, heat and heat stress must be managed proactively. Core temperature rises with intensity of the run, not just with the weather. And in any race that you're racing, whether it's hot or not, if required, start cooling early. Don't wait until you're distressed. And heat acclimatized athletes will tolerate much higher workloads. And I'll speak a little bit about heat acclimatization in a minute. Execution under pressure, that's the decisive skill. So pacing, fueling, and cooling, they're all what are called self-regulation skills. And, the top athletes, the best athletes have a discipline to stay inside their plan whilst others react. So they've got a kind of physical and a mental plan. The bottom line is that successful 40 to 80k trail racing, it's about holding a high fraction of your aerobic capacity without going over the top. It's about fueling and cooling relentlessly, really paying attention to that, and delaying fatigue whilst you're unable to avoid it, but delaying it as much as possible. A brief foray into training for heat. I think this is the poor man's altitude training. It has the same effects as altitude. Your plasma volume, your blood volume goes up. Your skin temperature at a given workload goes down. And you can get improvements in VO2 max, threshold pace, and your running economy. So it's a really important thing to use. Lots of athletes, middle distance and beyond, are using it now. Acclimatization, usually a minimum of 5 days. So if you can do about 10 days, that's better. You don't necessarily have to go to a hot climate to do this. You can get it via a sauna or a bath, and then you can use a sauna or a bath as top-ups once or twice a week, just to keep things going. One of the interesting things around training for heat is it also helps people psychologically. Heat training seems to, and we're not sure exactly why this is the case, but it improves your self-belief, your belief in your ability to perform. It decreases your rate of perceived exertion. So um, the perception of effort at a particular pace actually feels less after heat training. And it also helps with reducing anxiety, which is an additional perk. We spoke a bit about nutrition. The longer people go, the more they report nausea. Virtually everybody in these really long races gets nausea due to reduced gut flow, blood flow to the gut, because it's going to your muscles or to the skin in order to lose heat. And you get an increased permeability of the gut, so toxins can get into the bloodstream and also increase nausea. And you get flavor fatigue over time, and the whole thing can get significantly worse with heat. Important to avoid fat, fiber, solid protein, and hypertonic concentrated drinks. All of these are really a no-no. And as I've said probably repeatedly, you need to train your gut with 60 to 140 grams of carbs per hour, preferably a glucose fructose mix, and that needs practice. And there's lots of stuff that you can see on the table here that the athletes can use given their preferential tastes and needs. Interestingly, just in terms of reducing that kind of nausea, deep breathing and mindfulness training can also help. Coming up to the final stretch now, I'm just going to say a little bit about the psychology. So the performance space model, this is a model that I created from my master's dissertation in sports psychology. And essentially, it's a model that says you have to delineate who is this athlete, and we've said a lot about this throughout the course of the presentation. Who is the athlete? What are their strengths? What are their vulnerabilities? What are they capable of? What's their personality? What are their psychological skills in terms of being imagery, self-talk, state management? So do they see things as a threat or a challenge? Or if they see things as a threat, how do we turn it into a challenge? Because if you're in a challenge physiology, that's much better for performance than being in a threat physiology. So essentially, the individual athlete has goals. Your big goal is your outcome, which may be to go to the World Championships. We then have to look at your mastery and performance goals. These are the kind of skill sets that you need to be honest with yourself about. Where are you now? What do you need to develop? And by how much over what period of time? And from that, we get our process goals. And the process goals are the key goals that will actually make performance happen. The rest of it is mental fantasy until you put it into action through process goals. So we need a race plan. And once you've got your race plan and you're in the race, you're repeatedly checking on the inside. How am I doing? What's my rate of perceived exertion? How am I feeling? Does this feel tough? Does it feel okay? How are my legs? How's my breathing? How's my heart rate? Checking on the outside, where am I in the race? What are my checkpoints? What's my splits like? Where am I in terms of my other competitors? So that's how am I doing? And with that evaluation, it's kind of like, well, what's my focus? What's my focus for keeping going? And that brings to bear, particularly in the last third of when you're in the pain cave, imagery, self-talk, state management. How do you do that, and how do you keep your focus of control in that kind of external? So I hope to be doing a webinar on the more detailed elements of this later. And I do have a book coming out 25th of March, Peak Performance Psychology for Endurance Athletes. It'll be published by Routledge, and I think it is available for order. So a quick tout for that. And I'd just like to finish up with some closing thoughts that uh, trail running preparation is very much multidisciplinary. There's a lot of things that need to be there in place. I'm going to repeat that each athlete has their own path. You need to work that out with them. What's your goal? It's to prepare your body, brain, and skill set for the demands of race day. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm happy to take any questions. I think Naomi and Alistair are also on the call, and you can direct questions to them. And I'll hand you back to Jason now. Or Angela.
It looks like Jason's fallen asleep, but thank you very much, Lewis. That was very informative and interesting. Jason, are you there?
I am indeed, yes.
Yeah. Are there any questions in the chat? If people have any questions, would you like to put them in the chat? I think, Lewis, did you have a few people emailed you questions before,
So
or have you answered those?
Adrian Stott, I think Adrian maybe is on the call. Adrian put a couple of questions in, but knowing when the right time to move up in distance, not even long to ultra, but from 20K to 50K, when's the right time? I think that is a conversation around what I was discussing earlier. When you're looking at the people's strengths and weaknesses, particularly around their maximal aerobic speed, their threshold pace, what are they like in terms of marathon pace sessions. So we need to make a scoring of 1 to 10 so that you can work out where the peaks and the troughs are. What are you good at? What are you not so good at? And I think that can let you know what it is that you need to develop and put your time and attention to, Adrian. And so it's not kind of one easy answer, but I think there needs to be an honest appraisal with athletes because it is easy to, I think, move up too quickly. And you can come to a bit of harm through that, possibly. But to be fair, a lot of folk do it and enjoy doing it and they're okay. But I think if you're looking to do it at the highest level, you need to really adequately prepare and have that gap analysis and make sure that you're doing, you have a realistic plan uh, to close the gap. A second question Adrian had was about what's your best distance, what's your best surface, how do how do people kind of gauge what they're really good at, and some trail running is actually not so technical anymore. It's often done on really quite wide trails that are actually quite fast. And in Killian Journey recently, I don't know whether you saw this, Angela wrote a significant article kind of bemoaning the fact that, several years back, mountain and trail were really, there was very significant technical climbs that really had people working incredibly hard, but they needed technical knowledge. And that's now, in his view, as mountain and trail have come together, it's now become much more runnable and a bit less technical. But yeah, so I think that that's the way the sport's going. But I do think that there's still enough technicality there to make sure that you do incorporate technical training. I've got Rob. Hi, Rob. What common mistakes do you see in your developing or other runners, and what mitigations do you put in place? Well, I think two things. I think runners often tend to just do too much too soon. And they may not fully identify a gap, a plan. So I really encourage runners to look at what are the strengths across the whole strengths and weaknesses across that kind of whole domain of speed to endurance and the various things that I looked at earlier, and then to formulate what is the gap and how long is it going to take to bridge that gap? What do I need to do to bridge that gap? And it usually takes, Rob, I think a lot longer than people realize. There's a vogue for double threshold, and folk jump on the bandwagon. And I think double threshold can work really well, but I don't think it works well unless you are already at a decent volume of threshold in a single session. There's also something called the Norwegian singles model, which is basically sub-threshold, a pace that's just maybe 10 seconds per mile slower than threshold, that is a single session. And that's also got good results for people, and probably is something that should be discussed more and brought more into training. So Stu has asked about, oh, let me get back to that. What do you mean by float in your training runs? Okay, so the classic thing would be if you're doing 1 kilometer, say at race pace, your next kilometer float. By float, we're meaning running 30 to 40 seconds slower in that kilometer to partially recover, but you're still getting an aerobic effect. So that's what the float is. And you can do all sorts of floats. I mean, some of my middle distance runners will run 400-meter runs, and they'll do a 40-second 100-meter float, between them. So you can do all sorts of things with floats, but it really, in my view, really helps really develops your aerobic capacity a bit better than just jogging between the repetitions. And it stops you running the harder reps too hard as well, because that's another failure that I see in people. They run their threshold too hard. There's Naomi and Alistair. What were the most significant changes to your training which has enabled you to reach the next level? So if Naomi and Alistair are online, can you unmute and give a little kind of idea about the significant changes that you made?
Do you want to go first?
I can go first. Yeah, so I think for me, I've been quite injury prone in the past, and I guess maybe I still am to a certain extent. So I think the threshold training was a real step change for me in terms of, as Lewis is just saying, not running it too hard. I think initially I was definitely the classic victim of doing it too quickly and at a too higher intensity. And the second thing would be strength training, really embracing sort of 1 to 2 kind of good quality sessions per week. And for me, I think that made quite a big difference in terms of just injury prevention, and just stopping those little niggles becoming bigger issues, and therefore preventing consistency in training. So that's probably the big thing that I focused on and will continue to do so.
Thanks, Alistair. Naomi, are you around to answer your
Yeah,
part
I'm
of it?
here.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it was probably like a mix of things. I think probably in the years before, like kind of on track and stuff, had probably been doing quite a lot of the same things for a wee while. So I think the longer threshold sessions were definitely, I think that was kind of one of the first like big things. Like some, I guess, yeah, as Lewis mentioned, some of them were pretty long, and I think also doing them like off road. And I think when you're off road, it's kind of you're not really looking at the pace at all. It's much more on feel, and I think that's like helped a lot. I think with like doing it at about the right intensity. So I think that's been really good. And I think the double thresholds that this year was the first time I'd used that, and I think that made quite a big difference. I think like in terms of like increasing running volume, I think like I probably run like 5 days of the week, and it was a good way to do a bit more running without having to run 6, and like I could kind of keep kind of cross training on the other days. So I think that was probably maybe the
I think it's
two
important to
main
say that
things.
one of the things that we've kept going with you, Naomi, is your cross training, is swimming and cycling. That forms quite a big part of your aerobic build, and that works very well for you. So that's number one. Number two is whilst you're there, I'd like you to, that 5 by a mile downhill, uphill. Can you give us some comments about that session and about how you experienced it?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's just a hard session because I mean, even on the first rep, you don't feel great going back up again, and I guess that like progresses through it. But yeah, it's a good one, and I think especially at the Worlds where there was sort of three big climbs, but four climbs altogether. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, the switching from a hard down to going back up again, was pretty key, and I think I'd been definitely been warned in the past, like of not going too fast on the downhill because then you feel crashed on the way up. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, being able to train that has been useful too.
It's been, yeah, okay. That's great. We've got another couple of questions. So Doug Stewart said, when discussing maximal aerobic speed, threshold, etc., how do you define or set these with athletes? Do you pace training intensity on, sorry, this is flicking, on pace, heart rate, lactate, RPE, or something else? Right. So I think, Doug, runners, I like runners to run to feel, and that's essentially what Naomi's saying, particularly on trail, is getting the feel of what efforts are like. I think that with some of my athletes, particularly the guys doing half marathon to marathon, some of them, they've got a lactate meter. They absolutely use lactate meters to gauge effort. It's been good for them because it actually slows them down because they've been going too fast. But most of the time, I'm trying to work on just what would be the feel of your current 10K, 5K pace and half marathon pace, and really just working to that. For the threshold, I usually do say to people, please run a bit more within yourself. You're far better running a few seconds per mile slower than running a few seconds faster. Running a few seconds faster will create more problems than it solves. I do think with respect to heat and altitude, as you've said, we need to be mindful of the extra stress it places on athletes, and elements such as iron and ferritin. Certainly, if you're going to go to altitude, you should get your blood checked for your iron and ferritin levels. And there are some really good guidelines, very clear guidelines about what your iron should be before you go to altitude. What kind of exercise would you do in the gym, and where would you fit those sessions into the training week? Well, Alistair, can I bring you back into that? Because you were really quite good at organising that in a busy week for you.
Yeah, so
What did you do and how did you do it?
it was generally one session, was always the morning after an evening session the night before, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So you did it on tired legs, and that's fine because it just sort of added to the overall training benefit. Generally a mix of stuff, normally some kind of squat in there, normally some kind of sort of glute exercise, hamstrings as well. I've always had issues with those, and lower legs, so balance and calf stuff. And then if I could squeeze another session in, it would normally be sort of the Monday. So I guess sort of halfway between the other two sessions. So there'd always be one really good quality session, and I try to do that soon after the sort of maybe the threshold on the Tuesday or something, Wednesday
Yeah.
morning, Thursday morning. Get to the gym and get some good high quality in, and then squeeze something else in if possible.
Yeah. So I think doing strength work is really important for many athletes. I do think it helps. It does help with injury prevention, but it also clearly helps with running economy, developing running economy. Some really good research on that 10 weeks of strength work can improve running economy by about 5%, which is really quite major. And it's not rocket science. You just, you need a squat, you need a deadlift, you maybe need some single leg squats as ancillary exercises, and maybe some glute thrusts. But you don't, it's not a huge amount that you need to do. I mean, I usually suggest either 2 to 3 sets of 5 or 6 repetitions. And you need to be done in about 30 to 40 minutes. So if you're spending much longer than that, then I think that's just a bit too long. But I do think it's a kind of ancillary training that is good for all athletes. I think looking at this, Jason, I think that's all the questions answered, and you can maybe check to see if I'm right there.
Yeah, I think that's all of them, Lewis.
Okay, so I'll hand back to you and you can do the closing.
Yeah, thanks very much, everyone, for signing in and tuning in tonight. Lewis has kindly shared his presentation slides, so I can distribute those to everyone just in case you'd like to go and have an additional look at those. And we hope to have the webinar recording uploaded on the Scottish Athletics YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of the week. And again, I'll also distribute the link to that around when it's ready. Angela, do you have anything left to just close out?
Just to thank Lewis again, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Lewis will answer them if you let me have them or Jason have them. Thanks again, Lewis, and thanks Naomi and Al for coming along.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you.